One of the most popular topics within the spiritual community is the topic of the timeline split between the fifth dimension and the third dimension. So today I'm going to be explaining exactly what this timeline split is all about. What the popular concept of a timeline split means is that the human collective consciousness is going to come to an upcoming choice point. And at this upcoming choice point, the human consciousness is going to split into two separate timelines. One timeline is going to be on an ascension course, or what we would call an evolutionary trajectory. The other timeline is going to split into a descension course, and therefore a de-evolutionary trajectory. So these two timelines, one that is ascending in vibratory rate, and one that is descending in vibratory rate, can also be looked at as different probable futures that the human collective is accessing and aligning with, whether we know it or not. We are constantly either growing and expanding our consciousness and therefore evolving, or we are creating more fragmentation, which is known as entropy, and therefore aligning our vibration and our timeline to the descension trajectory. Now, this might all just sound like religion remixed, going into a hell realm or going into a heavenly realm, if we don't bring into this a little bit of pragmaticism. So really, the most important concept that comes into play into the timeline split would be to fully and thoroughly understand all the different ways that entropy manifests in our reality. So to learn all about entropy and its spiritual meaning, you can watch my video on this titled Chaos and Order, Entropy Explained. That video, to be quite honest, is enormously important for all of these spiritual concepts that we will be facing within the spirit of this age moving forward, and for a spiritual awakening in general. It's going to bring literally the physics of this reality into its spiritual context and make more sense rather than just regurgitating dogma. The collective consciousness here on Earth goes through cycles of entropy, which is division and fragmentation, and it goes through cycles of syntropy, which is unity and coherency. So when the collective consciousness on Earth is going through different cycles, they are using a very important marker to indicate whether or not their consciousness is evolving or whether or not their consciousness is disintegrating or dissolving. And that marker is free will. Now, I know free will is for some reason this huge controversial topic, and many, the majority even, think that free will is a myth. But actually, free will is intimately equated with what we know as Dharma and what we know as Christ consciousness. So, the reason why people never perceived free will as being an actual reality is because their consciousness is currently not at a high enough vibratory rate to perceive free will. So the vibratory rates that are below Christ consciousness are ones that we're looking at that are what we call separation consciousness. It's a low frequency, it's a low level of consciousness. That's why they cannot perceive free will. When a person raises their consciousness high enough into Christ consciousness or even ones above that, they can start perceiving free will, which is why there's giant controversy once again over this concept. Now, one way that the spiritual community has abused this concept of there being no free will is when it comes to the timeline split. Many people within the spiritual community say that those who can perceive a timeline split and those who are speaking about a timeline split are actually causing division and that they're propagating division, when in reality, that would just signify that they don't believe in free will. To learn more exactly about this, you can watch my video on it titled Lucifer Explained, because this concept of there being no free will and this concept of there being a timeline split that is fueling fear and division isn't the case. It's actually coming from a Luciferian thought form that wants all to ascend, that can only see one, that can only perceive there being reality within no free will, and also a reality that doesn't have there being any type of actions that are fueling different outcomes. So it's one that lacks discernment, and it's one that cannot accept that discernment plays a role in our evolution. And so it tries to spiritually bypass the fact that we do have free will, and it just goes straight into believing that unity and ascension is for all, therefore taking away our own personal choice and actions that lead to evolution or de-evolution. The true nature of time is cyclical. Time appears to us as linear, but it is cyclical. This is why we have different seasons. The seasons are a representation of time's cyclical nature, but it doesn't stop there. There are larger cycles we don't see, and those cycles immerse our consciousness into an invisible spring, summer, fall, and winter, or what we know as dark ages and golden ages. Why this is important is because time in the third dimension repeats itself. It recycles. It goes into denser expressions and it goes into lighter expressions, like the peaks and lows of a wave. If a being has raised their consciousness and begins to oscillate higher than the field of third dimensional time, they begin to start entraining their frequency into a completely different version of space and time, with experiences and lessons that best accommodate their frequency. When a being has remembered they are the creator, their frequency will begin to raise higher than the options and experiences that are currently available within a collective space-time that is still asleep, until, eventually, there will be no more resonance. So a major timeline split would be between all of the collective consciousness that is ready for a new curriculum and has already mastered the third dimensional curriculum, and all of the collective consciousness that would best be served by continuing to grow in the third dimension. When this split happens, it's called phase lock, and a phase lock is the real name to what we are calling the split between third dimensional consciousness and fifth dimensional consciousness. Now, the second law of thermodynamics says that entropy always increases with time. But entropy does not always produce chaos. It is needed, because entropy is more like a marker. It is a measure of the number of different ways that a set of objects can be arranged. So entropy is what fuels cell division and timeline division because it fuels expansion. All of this comes down to what the next step for growth is for a collective. Entropy will manifest as either chaos or expansion, depending on the being it is interacting with. So the collective consciousness here on Earth goes through different cycles. Some of these cycles are what we consider descension cycles. And in descension cycles, we have more veils on between us and our higher self. So we're more in a state of separation consciousness, but that does not mean that we're not developing our soul, because we can take that information that we've used within those lives and those experiences to still create a lot more consciousness that will be realized in an ascension cycle. So we have descending cycles here on Earth where there's heavier, thicker veils, and then we have some ascension cycles where there's thinner veils. There's barely veils. And what I mean by veils is there's less separation between us and our higher self. So in these ascension cycles, the universe supports our consciousness evolving. The universe supports us being more spiritually evolved. And so in the ascension cycles, we could look at it like all of the work done in any cycle is integrated and used to develop our consciousness more, where our vibratory rate literally becomes so high that it can no longer be a vibratory match to the older descended version of Earth. So in an ascension cycle, we can just look at this from a vibratory rate. Can a being who's operating from a higher vibratory rate inhabit an earth that does not vibrate at that rate, that even vibrates at a very low and unconscious rate? Well, yes, they can cohabitat. They can share that time-space reality, but only so much, until the beings who have developed their consciousness and have increased their vibratory rate have so much momentum, focus, and attention going into a more congruent realm, and the descended timeline, or the more unconscious vibration, can only inhabit that same time-space reality until it goes so far into entropy, into fragmentation, or just into unconsciousness. So yes, they can inhabit the same environment, the same reality, the same time-space, but only for so far and for so long, because eventually it's going to split just like how a cell divides. Timelines mimic the laws of nature. So whatever is going on in the metaphysical that we can't quite see, we can look at a microscopic level through cell division. The fractal nature of this universe doesn't just point to things that are happening at a spiritual level. It points to things happening at a physical level, and it bridges them. So because of that, timeline splits happen all the time. If you want to know more specifically on timelines and timeline splits, you can watch my video on that called Timelines, How to Jump Timelines. So, timelines divide all the time. But when we have a collective that is increasing their vibratory rate so much, and then on this side, a collective that is decreasing their consciousness and therefore their vibratory rate so much, then at that point, it just becomes too large of a chasm, of a vibrational mismatch to be able to cohabitat the same time-space reality. You would need at that point to have collective new timelines, not just personal new timelines. Personal new timelines change all the time. We know this as the butterfly effect. The butterfly effect means if you pick up a cup or if you don't pick up a cup, your entire reality and the future is changed by that decision, so on and so forth. But that's a personal timeline, which shifts, depending on the person's consciousness all of the time or rarely. But collective timelines, they take a little bit more momentum to shift. So even though we experience collective timeline shifts, they're still not being experienced at these huge precipices that I'm talking about and that the spiritual community is talking about and looking at. These huge major timeline splits are ones where there's a complete either graduation out of the reality that we are currently inhabiting, or one that's shifted into what I consider a coercion timeline or a de-evolutionary timeline. So those would be experiencing things like the New World Order, more censorship, more things that are of a controlling nature. This is where we become hyper politically correct, where we can't say anything. This is where we have thought police. This is really just one that is very focused on being coercive and controlling. So that's like an enslavement timeline. But anyways, the ascension timeline would be one where you have an increase in your vibratory rate and a collective also with an increased vibratory rate. So there's so much momentum, attention, and focus going into these new timelines that are ones that show and reflect our evolution. And then we have in the ascension timeline, which really there's more than one, but for the sake of ease and simplicity, we're just going to pretend that it's one ascension, one descension. But in the ascension timeline, you have beings who have raised their consciousness high enough to have that reflected in their actions, in their emotional body, in their mental body. So this is an increase in vibratory rate that isn't just happening at a mental level. This isn't just happening at an emotional level. This is about the inner reality matching up with the external reality, which can only be done through action. So that's why this ascension process that we're in seems to some people like it's taking forever. It's really because the healing process that we're going through is not on one layer. It's not in one dimension. It's happening on all levels of our energy field. And so because of that, it's happening to our entire multidimensional beingness. And so that's why we see so many different pitfalls in this ascension process. It's because there's things that are masquerading as ascension timelines, when in reality, they're leading a being's vibratory rate into more polarity, into more division, into more fear and separation. So a lot of the things right now that are being done in the environment to help us heal at a mental level, at an emotional level, at a physical level where we're taking actions that reflect our higher consciousness, this whole process depends on divine timing, because so much of us right now are kind of in this recalibration zone. To understand more what I mean about this, you can watch my video on it titled The Light Body Recalibration Process. And in this recalibration process, we're actually being given a grace period, we could look at it, to increase our awareness and increase our consciousness into unity consciousness. Because in this time frame that we're in, there's a lot of different competing think tanks that are trying to lead a being's vibratory rate into a descension trajectory, into a de-evolving timeline. But it's masquerading as being one that's coming from an ascension timeline. This is what we see most prevalent being played out through the political theater arena, where either one polarity or one side that has a complete extreme opposite side thinks that they're superior in some way, but really they have a lot of different shadow blind spots and a lot of different things that they're blocking out of their awareness, or that they refuse to see and integrate that the other side is actually reflecting. So we see this being played out in so many different themes, but really one of them that's strongest in this time is through religion and non-religion, or through a victim and perpetrator, or through masculine and feminine. There's so many different ways that we think we're in a higher state of consciousness when we're actually fully vibrationally entrained into different type of conflicts that are fueling a trajectory that is one that is descending. It's devolving. This could even be over-identifying with whatever is going on in our emotional and mental belief systems. Anything where we're not allowing ourselves to become aware of something that is acting as a blind spot, or it's acting as some kind of psychic block, is something that's preventing us from being able to raise our vibration and truly heal our multidimensional being into an ascension timeline. So right now we see ourselves in this calibration process, and we're learning discernment. The reason we're learning discernment is because that's very important to becoming spiritually sovereign. Discernment and sovereignty go hand in hand, and we can't gain discernment without really weird pitfalls to our evolution, which is what we're currently in. Some of us may have resistance to the term ascension being used to describe this whole process because we equate it with New Age hyper-religious thought. And that's fine. In that case, you could just replace ascension with whatever you feel comfortable with. What do I care? My blood sugar is getting low. Now, how a major timeline split would occur would not actually appear to our human eyes. There's never going to be a point in this universe at this dimension where we see the editing process of the strip of film that we call life. So we don't see actually when there's splices put together or things edited out or things inserted. We just view everything as one continuous reality. And when we do see some sort of splice inserted or not inserted and taken out, whatever. If we do see the editing process, that's what we know as déjà vu. So when we see a timeline split occur, it will actually be through the actions that are taken, because the actions that are taken are what will align us with seeing certain results. This is most basic and fundamentally known as cause and effect. So it's not likely that we are going to perceive with our physical eyes a definitive moment that signifies there was a timeline shift, like a judgment day or a rapture type scenario. Instead, what we would perceive is incrementally positive shifts taking place in our external reality. So positive shifts in one area of the earth arena, and then positive shifts in another area of the life arena, and then positive shifts, things that were of an unconscious and detrimental nature, we will see incrementally swapped out with positive, conscious, and healthy versions of those institutions, of those regions within our external reality. So what this means is we're going to see first a tower moment. We're going to see the chaos of breaking away, pulling away, because it's that cell division going on, from everything that is unhealthy and really detrimental and toxic in nature, crumbling first. Those systems, those institutions that are archonic, need to go through a purification process. And what that will look like to us is just destruction. The level of this destruction that will take place in the external reality is going to vary. It's not going to be experienced by everyone as needing to be its most severe form. It will depend on a person's attachment to old systems, such as the military-industrial complex, with many people who are on the ascension trajectory are currently in a little timeout zone in order to purify because they're so attached to those systems. There's going to be other shifts we will see in our external reality of a more positive nature that will be more graceful. So the shifts will come both startling and smoothly, but each are a sign that we are moving toward a new earth. Some of the shifts will appear as miraculous, but many of the shifts will occur as energetic blocks being lifted. These blocks have to do with actions the collective wanted to take to help build this new earth. If people had been experiencing blocks in their projects or contributions to this new timeline, they will start finding more ease and flow. And if beneficial tools and models for society were being held back, those blocks too will be lifted on the New Earth timeline. Wherever there was once energetic barriers, there will be only grace. I hope this has helped you ascend. Make sure to subscribe to my channel for higher dimensional guidance through spiritual awakening. See you next time.